Imagine a rain so dark and sticky it permanently stained everything it touched. A rain that didn't bring relief from the heat of a burning city, but instead carried an invisible, deadly poison. This wasn't a nightmare. For the survivors of Hiroshima, this was the horrifying reality of the black rain, a terrifying consequence of the atomic bomb with effects that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. This is the story of what happened after the flash, when the sky itself turned on the survivors below. August 6, 1945. At 8:15 in the morning, the clear summer sky over Hiroshima was torn apart by a light that didn't seem to belong to this world. In a single instant, one weapon, codenamed Little Boy, unleashed a destructive force of around 15,000 tons of TNT. The city, a bustling hub of military and civilian life, was home to over 250,000 people. In a flash, tens of thousands of those lives were simply gone. Buildings were flattened, families were vaporized, and a community was brought to its knees. We've all seen the haunting images of the mushroom cloud, that icon of atomic power. We've heard the staggering death tolls. But the horror didn't stop with the initial blast and the firestorm that followed. For those who somehow survived the first few moments, a new and insidious terror was brewing in the sky above. It was a phenomenon born from the bomb's unholy alchemy. Within hours, the sky began to weep. But this wasn't ordinary rain. It was a black, greasy, toxic downpour that would become a symbol of the bomb's lingering curse, forever changing the lives it touched. So, how does something like black rain even happen? To understand it, we have to look at the moments just after the detonation. The bomb exploded about 600 meters, or nearly 2,000 feet, above the city. The result was a fireball with a core temperature of over 1,000,000 degrees Celsius, instantly vaporizing everything and everyone at the hypocenter. This blinding heat was followed by a cataclysmic blast wave that leveled almost everything within a 2-kilometer radius. That 1-2 punch of heat and blast created the perfect conditions for a citywide firestorm. Wooden homes and paper screens provided an endless supply of fuel. As this massive inferno raged, it started creating its own weather. The intense heat generated a powerful updraft, like a violent chimney, sucking debris and smoke thousands of feet into the air. But the iconic mushroom cloud wasn't just smoke. It was a churning cauldron carrying the atomized remnants of Hiroshima. Pulverized buildings, incinerated trees, soil, and the vaporized bodies of thousands of people were all drawn into this column of superheated air. And it carried something else. Something uniquely sinister. The bomb's residual radiation. This was a deadly cocktail of around 200 different radioactive isotopes, particles of uranium and plutonium that had escaped the initial nuclear reaction. These invisible poisons were sucked up into the atmosphere along with everything else, hiding inside the rapidly expanding cloud. High up in the atmosphere, a terrifying transformation was underway. Hiroshima is a city of rivers, and the bomb's immense heat had evaporated a massive amount of water from these waterways. That moisture was also sucked skyward. As the mushroom cloud reached its peak altitude, it began to cool down. The huge quantities of ash, soot, and dust in the cloud acted as perfect condensation nuclei, tiny particles for water vapor to cling to and form droplets. It's the same basic process that creates normal rain. But the ingredients here were apocalyptic. Each droplet formed around a particle of radioactive fallout, a speck of burnt wood, or dust from a disintegrated building. Soon the cloud was saturated with a thick, dark, and highly contaminated mixture. About an hour or two after the explosion, the overburdened clouds couldn't hold their toxic contents any longer. It began to fall back to Earth. This was the black rain. Survivors described it not as water, but as a thick, sticky, oily substance. It fell in large, heavy drops that were sometimes painful as they hit the skin of the wounded. It left black streaks on any surface it touched, staining walls, clothing, and the very ground of the ruined city, a permanent record of the moment the sky wept poison. The black rain wasn't just a grim sight. It was the physical delivery system for the bomb's invisible residual radiation. For the dazed and injured survivors staggering through the ruins, the world had become a living hell. They were surrounded by unimaginable destruction. Fires were still raging, and the air was thick with smoke. In the sweltering August heat, made infinitely worse by the firestorm, a desperate thirst took hold. Many were severely burned and dehydrated, looking for any water to soothe their scorched throats. It was into this scene that the black rain began to fall. For a fleeting moment, it might have seemed like a blessing from the sky, something to quench the fires and their thirst. That hope quickly turned to horror. Akiko Takakura, who was just 20 years old, remembered the moment vividly. The fire and the smoke made us so thirsty, and there was nothing to drink. As it began to rain, people opened their mouths and turned their faces towards the sky and tried to drink the rain. She described the drops as painfully large. Everybody did the same thing, she recalled. But it just wasn't enough. The desperation was absolute. Survivors used whatever they could find to collect the dark liquid. With the rivers choked with debris and the bodies of the dead, the black rain seemed like the only option. They drank it. They let it wash over their open wounds, completely unaware that in their struggle to live, they were ingesting and absorbing a lethal dose of radioactive poison. Witnesses who saw others drink the contaminated water noticed that it seemed to make them die faster, a horrifying realization in the middle of all the chaos. The black rain offered no relief. It was just another layer of suffering. The immediate aftermath of being exposed to the black rain was swift and horrific. Survivors who had seemed relatively unharmed began to fall ill with a mysterious sickness that doctors at the time couldn't understand. This was acute radiation sickness, or ARS. The radioactive isotopes inside the black rain, once ingested or absorbed, began attacking the body from the inside. The symptoms were terrifying. Victims suffered from crippling fatigue, nausea, and uncontrollable vomiting. They developed high fevers and severe diarrhea. Within a few weeks, their hair would fall out in clumps and their gums would bleed. Purple spots would appear on their skin, a sign that their blood was losing its ability to clot. Their white blood cell counts plummeted, destroying their immune systems and leaving them defenseless against infection. Chieko Kiriake, a 15-year-old survivor, didn't show severe symptoms until mid-September, weeks after the bombing. Her hair began to fall out, her gums bled, and the telltale spots appeared on her body. She knew she had been exposed while walking through the ruins, searching for loved ones, right as the radioactive black rain fell. Children were especially vulnerable. The poison was invisible, silent, and it didn't discriminate. The black rain was a weapon that killed slowly and agonizingly from within. For decades, the Japanese government officially recognized a very specific, limited area where the black rain was thought to have fallen. Only survivors inside this heavy rain area were eligible for special medical benefits as hibakusha, bomb-affected people. But for years, thousands of people living outside this arbitrary line insisted they were also caught in the toxic downpour. They described the same sticky black rain and suffered from the same radiation-related illnesses, but their claims were systematically denied. They were victims trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare, their suffering officially unrecognized. This began a long, painful battle for justice. Survivors and their families presented testimony and scientific analysis, arguing that the weather conditions would have carried the rain over a much wider area. Finally, after a long fight, the court started to listen. In a landmark ruling in July 2020, the Hiroshima District Court recognized that 84 plaintiffs from outside the official zone had indeed been exposed to the black rain and suffered health effects. The court ordered that they be certified as hibakusha. This decision was upheld in 2021, with the Hiroshima High Court ruling that the government's old boundaries were invalid and anyone exposed to the rain should be considered a survivor. It was a monumental victory for the aging survivors, a formal acknowledgement of a reality they had lived with for decades, proving the bomb's net of suffering was cast much wider than anyone had officially admitted. The black rain's impact didn't stop with acute radiation sickness. For those who survived the initial poisoning, it cast a long, dark shadow over the rest of their lives. The long-term health effects have been a subject of intense and difficult debate. While some large-scale studies, like those by the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, found no statistically significant increase in cancer or mortality rates specifically from rain exposure alone, these findings are highly contentious. Critics argue that it's incredibly difficult to isolate just one factor like rain exposure, and they point to uncertainties in data collected decades ago. On the other hand, survivor testimonies and countless medical records strongly suggest a link between the black rain and long-term illnesses, especially various cancers like leukemia. The fear of getting sick became a constant companion for anyone touched by the rain. This fear created another kind of suffering: social stigma. The hibakusha, especially those known to have been in the black rain, were often treated like outcasts. Because people didn't understand radiation, many wrongly believed their conditions were contagious. Survivors, particularly women, faced discrimination when trying to marry. Families would investigate potential partners, and finding out they were a hibakusha was often enough to cancel the arrangement for fear of sickness or genetic defects. This pain is powerfully shown in Masuji Ibusi's famous novel, Black Rain. To protect their children from this stigma, many survivors carried their physical and psychological scars in silence, avoiding official help for years. The terrifying phenomenon of black rain wasn't unique to Hiroshima. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, when a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, a similar event occurred. The firestorm from the Fat Man bomb once again sent a column of soot, ash, and radioactive debris into the sky. And just like in Hiroshima, this produced a dark, sticky rain that fell on the survivors below. The mechanism was the same, a direct consequence of detonating a nuclear weapon over a city. In Nagasaki, too, survivors have fought for recognition, and a 2024 court ruling finally recognized 15 plaintiffs who were exposed to the rain outside the government's designated zone. While the radioactive rains of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are the most infamous examples, dark, debris-filled rain has been recorded at other times in history, usually linked to massive forest fires or volcanic eruptions. But what makes the black rain of 1945 uniquely horrifying is the invisible poison it carried. The dirt and soot were visible, staining everything they touched. But the real poison, the hundreds of radioactive isotopes, was imperceptible. It was a silent killer that attached itself to the very element we associate with life and renewal. This radioactive component makes the black rain a singular event in human history, a chilling testament to the unique horror of nuclear weapons. The story of the black rain is a difficult one to hear, but it's an essential part of our shared history that needs to be told. It reminds us that the consequences of war are often far deeper and more complex than we can imagine. If you believe these stories matter, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. Sharing this helps ensure the lessons of the past are never forgotten. The black rain of Hiroshima was more than just a weather event. It was a symbol of the bomb's profound and indiscriminate cruelty. It represented a new kind of horror, where the very sky could be turned against a population already suffering unimaginable trauma. The rain didn't care if you were a soldier or a civilian, a man or a woman, an adult or a child. It fell on everyone, turning what should have been a moment of relief into a source of slow death and lifelong pain. The story of the black rain is the story of the hibakusha who fought for decades just to have their pain acknowledged. It's a story of invisible wounds, both physical and psychological, that echoed for generations. And ultimately it stands as a permanent, dark stain on our history. A harrowing reminder that the true cost of nuclear weapons isn't just measured in the blast, but in the long, dark, and poisonous shadow they cast for years to come. What other hidden consequences of our actions might we be failing to see? That is a question we must keep asking ourselves, lest the sky one day rain poison again.